right, so we're going to do a recorded interview with Cedric Sunray, and what I'd like to do is start from kind of a background of who you are, where you came from, and how Haskell and the HELP organization got started.
Okay.
And of course, you're Cedric Sunray, and you're from your father's from Mississippi, right?
Alabama.
Alabama, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And your mother's from Canada?
Yeah, she's from Ontario, Canada.
Okay.
Yeah. I can kind of give you a rundown.
Okay, go ahead.
Basically, my parents met. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was stationed on an American military base in Canada at the end of his military career. And so my dad, he was a teenager, met my mom, and then they took off and eloped, and they went back to where my dad's family is originally from in Alabama. And they lived down there. They were both teenagers at the time. They lived down there for about a year. And my mom, coming from Canada, of course, Canada has its own racism issues, but the prevalence of racism in southeastern part of the United States, especially in the deep rural part of Alabama in the 1960s was, it was so thick. My mom is blonde-headed, blue-eyed. My dad, of course, looks like a stereotypical Indian guy, long hair, the whole thing. And they were in a state park at one point. They got hunted down by three white guys actually shooting hunting rifles at them. And my mom worked in a restaurant where she was a waitress. My dad wasn't allowed to come out of the back. He had to stay in the back where he was cooking. Black folks, Indians in the area, they had to get their food from the back window of the restaurant at that time. And then my mom worked at a movie theater, and she had to count the amount of people of color that came through the door. So all this happened within a span of about a year. So my mom told him, we're either getting divorced or we're moving. So my dad they moved as far away as they could. They went down to Opelika in Miami. Opelika is kind of rough, tough community. It's where like some of the contemporary hip-hop artists like Rick Ross and all these folks are from. They eventually went down to Key West, Florida, and that's pre-Key West being the tourist mecca it is. That's when Key West was kind of like this no man's land. Basically anybody and everybody lived down there with the local population, which are called conks, and conks are a mix of Cuban, white Bahamian, and black Bahamian, kind of mixed into one ethnic group. And so my mom got pregnant with me. She wanted me to be born where she was from. So when she was 8.5 months pregnant, she went all the way up to Ontario, Canada. I was born there. When I was 2 weeks old, they came right back down to South Florida, and that's where I was raised. My parents got divorced when I was 2. My dad became a pretty prominent drug dealer in South Florida during the 70s. I lived with my mom, and my dad ended up dying by the time I was just about to turn. I was like 4.5 years old at that time. So that's kind of how. And then my mom, instead of going back to Canada, she just decided she'd already lived down in Key West. She was just going to stay on. And so, I lived briefly in Opelika, and then we ended up staying in Key West. We lived in Mastic Trailer Park in the Bahama Village section of the island. And that's where I was raised. So I was raised completely in the conch culture. That was my family to me. Had no inkling that I wasn't racially or biologically connected to anyone in the community, because I was raised in that community and everyone treated me as family. And so I saw my dad's family sparingly, saw my mom's family sparingly. Didn't really have a connection to either side. And then when I was 18, signed an athletic scholarship out of high school. First week of classes, I bought this piece of junk used car, and I went down to my dad's community, and that's basically it. I was 18 years old and started learning about my dad's side of the family, and played ball for 2 years in the States. My mom's mom got sick. I ended up moving to Canada, stayed with her, and then I learned about my mom's side of the family when I was like 20, 21 years old. So that's pretty much it. My mom's family, her community of Port Albert was founded by Scottish men and Ojibwe women, and the community was definitely decidedly culturally Scottish, and so I started to learn about that as well. So that's kind of...
And that's the Métis community there in Ohio.
I themselves how they want. So some have chosen, a Métis identity in that area, and some have, completely held on to a completely Scottish identity. Because the community was founded and everyone, was with Ojibwe women in the beginning, anyone can enroll with the Métis Nation of Ontario, but that doesn't mean they choose to do that. So I leave that pretty open-ended to individuals,
And your mother's family, did they belong to the Métis tribe there, or did they have a tribal designation?
No. They're just part of the Port Albert community.
Okay.
I mean, they can be enrolled if they want. I was legally adopted by one of the First Nations in Canada. Some of the families have gone that route too. And so legal adoption is there because Bill C-31, of course, knocked out Indian status to any Indian woman who married a non-status man or a white man, and so forth. They lost their Indian status. And so in 1985, Bill C-31 came up, and it allowed for those women who lost their Indian status to regain it, and for their children to regain it, but not their grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so forth and so on. So that's what Bill C-31 created. Now, a new bill has just gone through this past year in Canada, which allowed now for the grandchildren to be enrolled. But of course, I was enrolled, decade plus ago. And so that's kind of where that sits. To me, my enrollment doesn't equate to a racial or cultural identity. And that's where I differ from a lot of people. Because I think you can be enrolled with a tribe and be completely disassociated from that tribe.
Certainly, yeah.
And and so that's kind of where my thinking is. I mean, culturally, identity-wise, I'm a conch first, being a person raised 18 years of my life in Key West, and then secondarily, I'm a MOWA Choctaw. So.
And your father is the MOWA Choctaw.
Yeah, my dad's MOWA Choctaw. Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about the MOWA Choctaw and the trials and tribulations of the tribe there in Alabama?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing about the community is we first petitioned for federal recognition per se in 1907 through the Miller Roll. And so when you look on the Miller Roll, you're going to see all these weavers and all these community surnames from our community, and then you're going to see them all as rejected on the roll. Our community is of Choctaw, Cherokee, some more minor Creek, Chickasaw descent. We had a few births that occurred when the Apaches were supposedly interned in Mount Vernon, Alabama for 7 years, so we had some births that occurred between us and them. They weren't really in prison, right? They were like living amongst us. So that's kind of where that gets kind of misinterpreted historically.
Like after they were released from prison in Florida, maybe they moved into the Vernon, Alabama area.
Well, that's when they were brought there.
Oh, okay.
They were imprisoned at Mount Vernon Barracks, Alabama. But they say imprisoned in the historical text, but everybody knows they weren't in prison. They were free to come and go in the regional area all they wanted. And so they lived with our community because they were supposedly imprisoned right in our community, which is Mount Vernon, Alabama. So you have, when you go to our museum, you'll see pictures of our community members and their community members fiddling together and all these kind of things.
Now on the rejections from the roll, from what was it, the guy in Miller?
Miller, yeah. Miller.
A lot of times you'll see people apply for, to the DOS roll or to the guy in Miller roll in the past, and they get rejected not because they're not Indian or not because they're not Cherokee or Choctaw, but simply because they're not a part of a specific community that those enrollment projects were intended to encompass. Is that true?
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what happened with us. Because our community claims a Choctaw identity first, and rightfully so, because that's the majority of what the ancestry is. But the other issue too in our community is we have an admixture of some white, some black, historically, within the community.
So it's a triracial, quadracial community.
No, well, I wouldn't say that at all. Actually, this whole concept of triracial isolate that all these anthropologists made famous in the 30s and 40s, that isn't the community at all, because the community is not equally of black, white, and Indian ancestry.
Just certain families.
Right. Our community is culturally Choctaw. I mean, there's no question about language program within our community since the 1960s, even in the school system. And so, even though someone could say the last fluent speaker passed away in 84 and 89, we'd already been working with the language so intensely since, 30 years prior to that. So there was lots of people that still had conversational ability in the language and these sorts of things. And so, when we petitioned for federal recognition, this is how they tried to divide the House. Our petition was solely based on the fact that the Porch Bandit Creek Indians, who we helped get recognized, I mean, there's no question about that. We were the biggest assistive force for them. They and the Mississippi Band didn't want a gaming competitor in the region, and it was, and so they just advocated a ton of things against us, and they tried to use the fact that we had a blend of tribal ancestries against us. The head of the Office of Federal Acknowledgement, the Bureau of Acknowledgement and Research at that time, and he still is Lee Fleming. And so the second he saw Cherokee in the petition anywhere in there, of course he was going to fight it voraciously the whole time. And so when you look at the process, we're always the tribe. Anyone that studies the federal recognition process, we're the tribe with whom every single time the criteria changed, we were the guinea pig test case in having to advocate that change. And so
it's interesting that Fleming would have any kind of say at all on any community that had admixtures of Cherokee, because that would be a conflict of interest since he is a Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma member.
Absolutely, and what happened is when you see his last year working for the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma in 1994, he attended Samford University in Alabama, a genealogical conference, and he stood up there and he said that he was completely against state-recognized what he called groups, and that all these such and such and such, and he said the MOWA Choctaw are black and they'll never get recognized. So 3 university professors, or 4, I have it here, signed right off and said he did say that, absolutely.
Wonder what his views are on the Seminole. They have they have a lot of African blood amongst their tribe.
Sure. And so the very next year he was hired on by the Bureau of Acknowledgement and Research. And so we've been petitioning, Indian Affairs ever since to say this guy has complete and absolute bias. He's also someone that's highly, close friends with those who formed the Cherokee Task Force as well. So you have a guy who, no matter what, was going to stop our petition. So we go in there, 11-2 vote in favor of federal recognition for the Senate Select Committee on Indian Affairs. So it's a done deal. Okay? He comes in and he works diligently. The former chief is now deceased of the Mississippi Choctaws, Philip Martin, gets this nobody who has a master's degree. He's never published a work in his life and calls him an anthropologist. And so he writes this 10-page paper that reads like a book report. And so I read this book report, and he's saying that our people are this mix of this. He even said we're Russian and we descend from a red-headed giant, or this kind of nonsense from these. It's so like outrageous.
That's like the charges against the Melungeons.
Right.
Yeah.
So he does this, and so he initially had said that our funerary rights were identical to the Mississippi Choctaws. This is before he was being paid by the Mississippi Choctaws. Immediately after being paid by them, he changed it and says our funeral rights are nothing like the Mississippi Choctaws. So we have both documents. And so we try to continually do all this, but the reality is the MOWAs were going to be stopped no matter what. And so in 95, then the Gina Band and us are up on the same rider for recognition. And so they literally go to Philip Martin and say, which one do you want to get recognized? Because we have to show this process works. Someone has to get through. So Philip Martin, the Gina Band only have 151 tribal members at that time. Our tribe has 3,000. And so the Gina Band are enough outside the geographic location of the Mississippi Band to where they can't impact their gaming very much. So he goes ahead and he says, we're going to, the Gina Band are legitimate. So when you look at the federal petition for the Gina Band, it's just the craziest things are in that petition. Because the Gina there's no question the Gina are Choctaws. No question. I've been there many, many times. Speak Choctaw, the whole thing. But they have no idea where they come from. They don't know how they got there. None of these they don't have an oral tradition to any of that stuff. And so in the end, the Bureau just simply made one up for them so they could push them through the process. So, this process is so ridiculous. We're on our 11th congressional bill now. Our 11th congressional bill just went in February. We've had a federal lawsuit, which was thrown out on a statute of limitations. And we've had 3 appeals through the Bureau, all which have been stymied. And it always comes down to gaming money and this perception of minor black ancestry. And when you have minor black ancestry within your tribal community, you're done for in this process. The Shinnecock and the Mashpee Wampanoags, they spent over million apiece. They bought their way through the process. Are they Indian tribes? Of course they're Indian tribes. But if you ask them directly, ask Lance Gumbs, ask any of their trustees, ask any of them, would they have ever got through the process if they didn't have gaming backers? They'll tell you flat out, of course not. We never would have made it through.
And it's a total money game.
Total money game.
Now, whenever you were talking about the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs and Fletcher's role in testifying against the MOWA Choctaw, are you also aware that Virginia DeMars and Paul Heinig were also there? Well, I'm sorry, not Paul Heinig, but Virginia DeMars was also a part of that cabal during that time period that had to do with the MOWA Choctaw?
Absolutely. Virginia DeMars is a total hack. I mean, Virginia DeMars wants everyone to be a Melungeon community. She has like an obsession.
Yeah, she's a proponent of the triracial isolate theory.
Right, sure. And I mean, she's a hack. You know, the funniest part of this whole process was, you know, they're supposed to come and visit your community, because, you know, the Bureau of Acknowledgement and Research. And they come in there smiling and doing all this. They showed up one day during this entire lengthy double-decade process. They showed up one day on a Sunday. On a Sunday now. Okay, now our people are church-attending people. So, I mean, you're not going to be hanging around a bunch of us on Sundays asking a bunch of crazy questions. They come on a Sunday, they stay for an hour and a half, and they leave, and they say that was their site visit. I mean, really? Really? So, I mean, the thing from the very beginning was to completely change the process. At one point, when the process, you had to qualify for 4 out of 7 criteria, the second that our tribes came up again in 95, 96, they suddenly re-expedited the process again, and now you had to qualify for 7 out of 7. So everyone else got in out of 4 out of 7. Now we had to qualify for 7 out of 7. The Bureau's already said a million times we qualify for 6 out of 7. But we can't do the genealogical component correctly, because all our people are listed as Negroes, mulattoes, white, octoroons, you know, all these things.
But why? But if everybody and their dog knows that racial designations in the records have been tampered with at the time that they were recorded,
sure,
and they were turning Indian people into mulattoes and blacks and whites in order to raise tax revenue, why then does the Bureau, the BIA, consider that a mark against an Indian community?
Well, exactly, and I think the reason is because they did this in 99, and now 12 years later, everyone does know that that's a bunch of crap, but at that time they could still get away with it.
Okay.
And, you know, there's one line in the denial of our federal petition, one line, that's the most telling line. The rest is just a bunch of fodder and absolute, eugenics crap. But there's one line that says some materials were received out of time. There's the line. So you can read, 90 pages of documents, and you only need to read one line. And they said, and so what were those some things? They don't list those some things. They were all of our language tapes from our community members who speak our language. They were all of our federal Indian boarding school records. How convenient that suddenly those materials were received at a time. Because those are irrefutable materials. The only reason the Gina Band got recognized is because of their language.
Do you think that this is a normal behavior amongst tribes out there that are pursuing federal recognition or even state recognition, that as soon as they get that recognition granted to them, then they shut down their contacts with the people that have helped them get there?
It's proven time and time and time again. When I spoke, me and Lance Gumbs were the keynote speakers at the North Carolina Indian Unity Conference, just about in Raleigh. That was just about 2-3 months ago. And Lance Gumbs, he's a trustee for the Shinnecock. At the time he lost the election about a month and a half ago. And so he's the one that led them all the way through the process. So, when we were speaking, he stood up in front of everybody. And he told them that the Shinnecocks wouldn't sell out like all the rest of them. But then Lance lost. And now the Shinnecock are a member of USET. You see, so everybody sells out.
And can you explain what USET is?
Yeah, United South and Eastern Tribes. So the USET are the 25 federally recognized tribes in the South and East. There might be one or two that aren't a part of the organization. And so all they do is they advocate against, recognition process for non-federal tribes. Because the majority of them are casino-owning, communities. They certainly don't want competitive. They want to maintain a competitive advantage in the area. So in white capitalism, you have to actually have a better product to win via capitalism. But in Indian country, you just have to attack people's identities to win via capitalism. And so this is kind of, but it's your typical scenario. It's a big boys club. Once you get in, you shut the door behind you.
And so the name of the game in Native American Indian recognition is about, is about product placement, product quality, and identity attacks.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's become that, and I think, it's like when they have to accept the Shinnecock or the Mashpee Wampanoags or the Narragansetts in the past, USET had to, because their only criteria for involvement is to be a federal tribe in the South and East. Well, there's a lot of people that didn't like it. When the Pequots came in, they didn't like it. They didn't want them black folks around them. You hear the stories. I hear them firsthand. So there's also that extreme racial bias. It's okay to be a white Indian, but don't be a black one. And so that's reality.
It's funny that there's so many problems on that aspect, because I know across the past decade or so that the opposite has also been true, that it's not okay to be a white Indian, but if you got color on your skin, you're better off. Now, I don't know if that's on just the powwow circuit.
I think it's the kind of color, because it's not okay to be a white Indian when you're powwowing and you're doing these outwardly pan-Indian type of activities. Mm-hmm. But if your brownish color is due to blackness, not Indianness, you're completely expelled. So, that's where the complexity, I think, lies in that issue. Because, they want you brown, but they want you brown via Indian, not brown via some black ancestry, too. So I think that becomes a constant marker and barometer. But, attempting to take a tribe who still has their language, still has their social dances, still has all these sorts of things, and then reinventing them as non-Indians or as mulattoes is, at best, insincere.
Well, it's certainly cultural genocide and actual genocide itself. If you're singling out a racial group or an ethnic group and continuously disenfranchising them and trying to reinvent their ethnicity and identity, that is a form of cultural and ethnic genocide.
Absolutely.
Now, on the front of the Cherokee Task Force and CNO, UKB, Eastern Band Cherokee, and the USET, have you also ever heard of the NAFPS?
NAFPS.
That stands for Native American Frauds and Plastic Shaman.
Oh yeah, I heard about it just through some people. Yeah, but what I know about, and we might have even talked about it, but what I know about them is that the guy who runs the organization, he's not Indian.
Right.
It's absolutely silly. It's your typical guy who claims to be of Indian ancestry, but even on the one really poor book he wrote, which I read, which is just a really poor book, it was written under the guise of being about military service amongst Indians, and it turned into a charade about attacking people like Churchill and all these other kind of, whatever. He's just your typical, in that book, Reclaiming Indian Identity. I'll have to get the exact title here, but I've sent it out on some emails. She talks with a member of a federal tribe who's into attacking other people, and he basically says it's because of his own insecurity about his own identity which started him into this process of attacking other people's identities. And so that's always the case. 99.9% of the people that engage in this are people that have very little Indian ancestry and who've only recently started to reclaim it.
And of course you're talking about Al Carroll.
Yeah. He's an Apache or something.
Who actually is a Mexican Mexican citizen, was born and raised part of his childhood in Mexico, and came to Southern California, I believe, closer to his teen years. And then there was a woman, a citizen of Great Britain, and the two of these people are the ones who founded NAFPS.
Right. Yes, I mean, that's just, it's just so ridiculous.
I guess the reason why I bring NAFPS into this mix is because of the venomous attacks against identity and the accusations of fraud and wannabeism that they espouse. They sound their philosophy and their way of thinking is very much like Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma's Cherokee Task Force and the David Cornsilk Cabal.
Yeah.
It's the same mentality, the same arguments, and one of the good articles about the NAFPS that you could read and apply it to Usenet and a lot of these other groups and people is an article done in Hayoka magazine. It was an article called Robin on NAFPS, a respected Native American grandmother's experience of being assaulted by New Age fraud and plasticshamans.org. And it was a really good. It's a really good article, but that's not the only article in Hayoka magazine. There's another one. Another elder was talking about NAFPS, but again, I bring up NAFPS into this mix because there seems to be a movement out there for the past 10-20 years especially to really go after and attack any Indian communities or persons who are not already part of a federally recognized tribe. And what most people don't understand is that during the termination era, the federal government severed its government-to-government relationship with Indian tribes and began a process of ending that recognition. And so in 1933, when they had the Indian Reorganization Act, all of the tribes had to go back and try and get federal recognition. And there's a lot of tribal groups and communities that were not as powerful, were not as influential, and did not have all this money that some of the other ones had. And so what you see are the richer tribes, they've got their federal recognition, but the poorer tribes are languishing even to try and get state recognition.
Yeah.
And these people like NAFPS and USET are set against them from claiming and exercising their rights as Native Americans in this country.
Yeah. Well, I see this article, Robin on NAFPS, talking about her experience without Carol.
Right.
Something, yeah.
Yeah, and her experience on the NAFPS.org site is very typical. Anyone that gets involved with that group, whether online or in the powwow circuit, or any of the other organizations like you've mentioned, USET and Cherokee Task Force, they'll have the exact same experience. As long as they're in total agreement with these psychopathic leaders that are running these organizations and groups, then they're fine. They're in the inner circle. But as soon as they disagree with even one thing, they start attacking, saying, "Oh, well, you're just a wannabe, or you're a wannabe collaborator, or you're, this, or you're that."
Yeah.
And, again, it's an attack on people's identity. What their motivating factor is, I'm sure there's a litany of reasons why these people do what they do. But as you said, a lot of it is about casino interests and trying to quell their possible competition. And another part of it, I think, is a power play. People have, along with greed, have a hunger for power and being put in the spotlight or being thought of as more Indian than everyone else.
Oh, sure.
And unfortunately, that way of thinking is very destructive to the Native community in general.
Yeah. I think with these people, though, a lot of these other ones, I'm not talking about these elected leaders of like Cherokee Nation stuff, but these other folks that are out there, if they weren't involved in this, they would have some other imbalance in some other area.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there really are people that there's a psychosis about it, and it's not blown out of proportion. I mean, to do the kind of things they do, you have to be kind of imbalanced. And what I noticed when you were searching these people, of course I call them directly, as you know. I go directly to the source of a lot of these folks.
Right.
And they're always from failed marriages, dysfunctional home situations, lack of any cultural upbringing. I mean, it's always the same story. And so you have people that are hurt, and when people are hurt, they're going to hurt others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's typically, what you have. And so the only way they really hurt you in the end if you allow that to occur. The other thing too with me is that I have involvement in a lot of areas besides Indian politics and Indian identity issues. I work on issues of gentrification, within tribal communities, Gaelic language revitalization. They're very different things. So this is just one thing.
One aspect.
One aspect that I involve myself in. And so I think time-wise and those kind of things, those become pressing issues. My first role is as a husband and father, so very involved in that role. Of course, I have employment as well. So
and congratulations on the birth of your new son.
Appreciate it. We're
2 days old, right?
Yeah, 2 days old. So we're pretty excited about that. But I think these people do hurt people. I think there's so many people out there that really are looking for acceptance on some level. And so when these people get into the mix with such people, they devastate them. I mean, they really, really devastate them and hurt them. And it's really unfortunate. And I do my best to explain to people. I mean, I've certainly been attacked, many times via postings on the internet and those kind of things from anonymous individuals. And I just try to tell them, you live your own truth. You know who you are. You know what community you come from.
Yeah.
Like if someone says I'm not from my own community, how ridiculous. My whole family's generationally from the MOWA community. I'm by blood and roll. So they say that I'm not that. Well, what can I do about that? Offering people proof, what's the point? Everyone has seen all my tribal enrollments that circulate around the internet so frequently, right, and all these sorts of things. So if they continue to say, well, I'm not that, well, okay.
And it's very telling, too, whenever someone is transparent like you are with your background,
sure,
and then you have these people that try to say that you're not who you say you are, and yet they're not transparent at all. They're very covert about who they are and where they're coming from.
Absolutely, that's always the thing. I think one of the things in me engaging the issue is I didn't know you weren't supposed to be transparent. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
When you grow up in this Cuban Kong black environment and then you haven't really engaged white America or Indian country, and then you're 18 and you suddenly do, I didn't know you were supposed to be dishonest.
Yeah. A lot of Indian people are raised to be honest because we're raised to understand that the outside world is a dishonest place, and that's what helps set us apart is being raised in a correct manner.
Sure.
And most Indian people that I've talked to throughout my life, most of them have not been generally dishonest people who lie. Most of the time lies come in whenever you're dealing with power struggles and money, and that seems to be kind of the corrupt force in the Native community. Have you experienced those types of corruptions within what you do with language programs? Have any of the tribes or any of the communities ever tried to use language programs or education for some strange nefarious purpose like they do with the recognition process?
Yeah, I mean, I try to tell other people from the beginning when I work with the tribal community that language should never be used as a weapon. But, some people certainly attempt to use it in that form. And, when you look at a tribe like the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, well, they were able for the last 15 years to pump a ton of money into their 10-year language program and create, online sites and do all these sorts of things, where a poorer tribal community who doesn't necessarily have their language can't. And so 20 years from now, the Cherokee Nation can say, well, see how many of our people can talk Indian? Well, that means nothing, because how many people could talk Indian 21 years prior? Because you had the economy to create a language diversion. That doesn't make it any more authentic than the tribe who didn't have the economy.
Right.
And so they're recreating this cultural ethic. If you read the newspapers out here in all these eastern tribes, you'll talk to people that went to the such and such cultural camp. Now, first of all, if you have to have a museum dedicated to your culture or cultural camps, obviously it's not being learned in the home. Okay, that's number one. It's something that you have to, create an avenue for, which I don't see anything wrong with that. But then when you thereafter say, well, see, our kids have their culture. No, your kids don't have your culture. You bought back something for 5 years worth of camps. It doesn't make it any more authentic than the tribe who didn't have the means to do that.
Right, it's a re-education attempt from the assimilation process, because as we all know, all tribes in this country, in North America here, the United States of America, we were all assimilated. Every tribe, every people, and language is dying. Language and culture is dying out throughout Native America, and it has been on this slow death and decay for 300, 400, 500 years. And unfortunately, there are some tribes who are worse off than others. And when you have federal status, you get the grant monies needed to re-educate your people. And so it seems like a red herring whenever you have these different groups like the CNO, Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, trying to tout that they're doing all these wonderful things with their language program or with their whatever program it is that they're trying to run. See, that makes them more Indian. Well, no, it doesn't. It just makes them more wealthy.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole. It's just a big farce to me. I mean, I'm all for you doing it, but not then turning it around on somebody else. If you're just doing it for you, all the power to you. Do it. But if you're doing it to then turn it around on someone else and say, look at us. Like a perfect example. This thing that's put out by the CNO about the fake tribes, they have that pamphlet or whatever. I'm looking at a copy of it here. So when you go through this pamphlet, and it's the support the federal recognition process to protect all tribal citizens. It's been out a couple years, right? It's on their site, and they send it around to people and all this. Well, they mysteriously put all the pictures in here of their people who are all brown Cherokees. Now, that's utterly ridiculous, of course, because that's the vast minority of their tribe, but they somehow make all the pictures. Then the next part is heritage is different from citizenship on the third page. There's a picture of a pair of stickball sticks sticking up, right? So they're showing all these cultural kind of images to show how realistic they are. The problem is those stickball sticks are Choctaw. My family made them, and we gave them to the CNO.
Talk about cultural non-context.
They're curved cross-pattern sticks. Anyone that plays stickball knows that those are Choctaw sticks. And the wrappings and everything on them, they asked me to come in, and our family to come in and to teach them how to play field game stickball. And so we set it up. They played it every year since 2005 at their Labor Day festivity. So they're using the same exact sticks which I brought to them. And they're putting those up as cultural imagery of the Cherokee. I mean, this is how completely lost. The Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and they put a picture of my daughter in their 2007 calendar because her Choctaw regalia is what it is, and she's identifiable and all these things. So they put her in the thing. Well, she's not from Choctaw Nation, Oklahoma. Why is she in the calendar? And in the year before, they had a picture of Creek stickball sticks on the front page of the calendar.
Again, cultural disassociation.
I mean, there's just it's just all the con game out there. You know, how can you really explain it to people? Because, you know, the other problem is when you attack these issues, people start to get a headache from you. They start to say, they disassociate, they don't want to hear it anymore. I'm sure there's people out there, when it says my name attached to something that's been sent out, they go, oh God, not again.
Right.
And so you have that reality too, you know, in dealing with these issues. It doesn't make a difference if what you're saying is substantiated and extremely obvious and true. You know, there comes a point where people don't want to hear it, regardless of the truth of it.
Yeah, truth seems to fall to the wayside these days more and more. And, you know, people like you and I and Joanne Pizzullo and Louis Bowling and Chief Oliver Collins up in Ohio and others. I mean, there is a really nice list of people out there trying to put the truth, you know, get the truth out there to people.
Right.
But oftentimes we're attacked because we're doing that. It's kind of like shooting the messenger. You know, people don't want to hear bad news, so they bury their head in the sand, or they say, oh, it's not my fight, or they try to sit on a fence.
Right.
And neutrality is just something that doesn't really exist in the Native community. I mean, there can be people out there that'll say, oh, well, I don't want to get involved in that fight, it's not my fight, I don't have a dog in that fight. They'll make up all these different excuses why they shouldn't get involved or why they're not going to get involved, when all the time all of these issues affect all of us equally. Because if you allow one tribe to be attacked, or one tribe to be not recognized because of, you know, gaming interests, money, and political power interests, then you know very well that that's going to come back to you and your tribe.
Right.
You know, it kind of goes back to the issue of the Gina Band of Choctaw. You know, the MOWA Band helped the Gina to gain recognition, but then whenever it came time to speak up and help the MOWA Band Choctaw, the Gina tribe didn't want to do that.
Right, Porch Creek as well. I mean, it's just...
And this happens repeatedly, over and over again. For instance, the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation in North Carolina, when they were up for state recognition, they got a ton of help from Saponi Nation of Ohio. In fact, a lot of their genealogy and history came directly from the records and files of Saponi Nation of Ohio via Richard Haithcott. And the council was not informed that was going to happen, but you know, this man did it on his own. And the Occaneechi Nation, you know, would tell the different people in Saponi Nation of Ohio that they support them and what have you. But as soon as they won their court case where they got their state recognition on a technicality, they closed down, and they have been non-supportive, and they have made some very non-supportive statements to people at powwows and other venues. And this just seems to happen over and over and over again. And I'm not real sure what the solution is, other than to continue to put the truth out there, whether it's online or in newsletters or making phone calls, and just trying to get people to awaken to the realities of the recognition machine.
Right.
And how that's destroying the Native community.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I hate to even hear that. I know the people internally in North Carolina, I think, were against their recognition as well. Mm-hmm. The tribes, and then now they're against. I mean, it's just this constant just nonsense.
Yeah.
It's constant nonsense. You know, for us, MOWA Choctaw, we will never join USET. We become fairly recognized. We'll spit on USET.
Yeah, I mean, they're purposefully set up to ruin state recognition.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to deal with people that have disparaged us. I mean, when you look at the resolution I sent out on the Help News about them, disparaging the Lumbees. And so I told the Lumbees, when you get recognized, if you join them, I mean, don't talk to me. I mean, you can't be that way. I mean, where's the integrity? There has to be some integrity praise. It's not. You have to have some integrity in his life. You know, and if you don't, I mean, who wants to deal with you? I know I don't.
Yeah, you know, integrity, you know, personal integrity and community integrity are, you know, an integral part of being real, of being authentic. And if all these people become sellouts, then what does that really say about their culture? Does it, you know, are they buying into this death culture of dishonesty and lies, power tripping and money? Because that leads nowhere. I mean, we see where our country is today, the United States. Through lies, deception, and power play, our economy has suffered greatly, and the relationships that our country have with other countries are on an ever-spiraling descent into hell. And if Indian communities, you know, can't take a lesson not only from, you know, the past history of their tribes and their communities and how people are treated here in the United States as it regards federal and state recognition processes, then I would think they would at least take a lesson from the greater political body of the United States government and its activities, because it mirrors it almost identically. And what goes on in the Native American community is a microcosm of what goes on in U.S. politics.
Right. Yeah. True.
It's amazing. You know, it's amazing to think that all the suffering and horrible things that all of our Native American brothers and sisters have gone through, the different racial issues and problems, and then to have to deal with people like the Cherokee Task Force and Mr. Fletcher and all these other goons that suppress our peoples.
Yeah.
Now, what are your thoughts about the future of the recognition process? Do you think it will continue, or do you think at some point that it will be changed fundamentally or done away with completely?
Well, I mean, I think we know that, you know, the federal government is a turtle, you know, and that's the pace at which it works and moves, and that it, you know, it's set up based on maintaining its status quo. I mean, it's just such a large process, and I think these federal tribes, as you see in their resolutions, they say, oh, we're not against federal recognition of non-federal tribes. We're not against that. No. We're against you going through the Congress, which they know means you can't get recognized. Because the second you have to go to the Office of Federal Acknowledgement, you might as well forget it. I mean, remember, the Shinnecock, I mean, why did they finally get it through them? Because they sued. And they won a federal court case that says they are now a federally recognized tribe. So the only way OFA could save face was to say, okay, we're going to recognize you now. Because they had no choice. So, I mean, since what? Since 96, there's been 2 tribes in the South and East that have been recognized through the process. 2. And one is the Shinnecock, the other one is the Mashpees that spent $50 million combined, you know, and all this kind of stuff like this.
And when were the Porch Creek recognized?
In 84.
84.
So they got to sneak in before gaming. And I mean, they used their pan-Indian style powwow as proof of their continual Creek existence and all these sorts of things. Just utter craziness. But at that point, 84, no one cared about federally recognized Indian tribes. There was no money to be had in that. And so, you know, we wrote the letter of support for them like they asked for in the spirit of Indian brotherhood. I got the copy of the letter, you know, all that. And then they turned around and Eddie Tullis 2 years ago in the MOWA Press said, oh, somebody else must have signed his name to that paper. so even when, you know, it's in written form and it's all done, it just continually changes. I mean, this is who we're dealing with.
Double speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's just constantly that way. It's all a political game. Do I think the process will be changed? Not till Lee Fleming's removed. I mean, you have to remove these type of people. They have to be brought out. I mean, we can look at the process. You had Eddie Tullis, who was the head of the Porch Creeks. We got him removed. And I will say we had something to do with that. All of us are MOWA Choctaw people. And, I mean, Philip Martin, he lost to Beasley Denson. Chad Smith may lose now. Who knows? I doubt it. You know, who knows? You know, he's going against Bill John Baker, but they'll probably have the election thrown out, and then they'll redo it. Who knows what they're going to do here? Well, I guess we'll find out this afternoon. But, you know, there's all kinds of... A lot of people have to be removed from the process.
So from your perspective, a lot of the people who are installed in these positions, they have to completely change out the staff of the people that are running the Office of Acknowledgement in order for that aspect of it to change. But do you think that they will ever revise the criteria at all? Or do you think they'll just make it harder, or just do away with it altogether?
I mean, every time they revise it, it's to make it tough for a certain community to go through.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's all talk. I mean, you see that Kevin Gover testimony from 2004. There's been no changes that haven't tightened it up even more. And like I've said before, none of these tribes themselves can get through this process.
And the
tribes that are already recognized, they could never get through the current process. And they had to go through it.
The Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, as late as, what was it, I believe last year, came out with a statement that the process was broken. That the recognition process was broken. And, for the Senate to come out and say this, and then, leave it up to the same goons like Fletcher, who, has been a huge part of breaking the process for the past, 2 decades? Fleming. I'm sorry, Fleming. I'm a little bit on the side of not understanding the logic in allowing someone like Fleming to stay in there to direct the process when he's part of the problem. Now, you know a lot about the MOWA Choctaw recognition process, and how many years it took, and how much work it's taken, to get to where it got. Excuse me. What's your opinion about what took place in Tennessee last summer with the 7 tribes? There were 7 tribes in Tennessee that got state recognition, and then the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma had sent a lobbyist in to influence the Attorney General in order to overturn that decision for 7 tribes.
Well, let me address that MOWA Choctaw first, and then that question.
Okay.
The first is that, and it has not to do with because I'm a tribal member or a community member in MOWA Choctaw. This is just about the reality of having, studied and been a part of this federal recognition process for so long. Is that, when you look at the Tour de France or any of these biking cyclist things, so you have a team of 4 riders, right, that are being sponsored. There's the one guy that goes out front and breaks the wind for everybody else riding behind him, right, so he can have faster time. He knows he's not going to be the winner of the Tour de France. He's already given that up for the rest of the team. That's just the way it is, That's what the MOWA Choctaws have always been. If it wasn't for us being the ram in the front of everybody else,
the pace setter,
if it wasn't for us, these other tribes wouldn't have a prayer of getting through this process. That's just a fact. That can't even be argued by people. I mean, we are the sacrificial lamb in this whole process. And so if people don't get in behind us, it's going to be a waste of everyone's time in the end to somehow push through this process. Because we have been that. We've taken all the hits. We've taken bullets for everybody, whether they realize it or not. If they really study the issue there, they'll know that, concisely. As far as the Tennessee situation is, there's 2 sides to that situation. One, is it ethical for what the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma did, seeing as taxpayer dollars is what funds their machine? Of course not. I don't want to pay for the Cherokee Nation to fly to Tennessee and to hire lobbyists to go against these people. The other side to that is, if standing up and taking pictures in the newspaper with a Bible or a copy of the Torah and saying, we're, the 13 lost tribes of Israel, and we're the Cherokees of such and such.
Right.
Well, that's utterly ridiculous.
Right.
So you have a problem. You have some groups that are ridiculous, and then you have the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma who's hateful and is equally ridiculous on so many levels themselves. And so, you just have this problem. Do I think that those supposed tribes in Tennessee, and I don't even mean supposed in a negative way, I don't know anything about them, should they be recognized? How do I know? I'm not involved in that process. I don't know those people well enough. Do I think state recognition is a springboard to federal recognition? Absolutely not. We've proven that concisely. Our tribe's state recognized. It's been no springboard towards nothing. So that's the other side of that equation. I mean, I don't know if those families have held together an actual community. I think it's tough being a MOWA Choctaw in that regard. MOWA Choctaws are a clearly identifiable community. I mean, we have about 12 surnames. We've all been intermarried since, way back. I mean, there's 93% of our tribal enrollment lives within 15 miles of the tribal complex. So you're dealing with an actual community. So it's hard for me. I mean, are all those people, have they lived together all these years? Are they, that way? Because the Cherokee Nation certainly hasn't lived together all these years. Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma.
Right, and that dovetails greatly, real nicely with the idea of community. And people think that, oftentimes people think that whenever I talk about definitions that I'm belaboring an issue, but really it goes, definitions of community, definitions of Indian, definitions of Indian tribe go right to the heart of this whole recognition process. And although I don't know firsthand or personally any of the people involved with these 7 tribes in Tennessee, I think they're being plagued by the same thing that we all are, which are these definitions about what is a community and what is an Indian. What's that definition, and who gets to dictate what that definition is? I agree with you. I think that, I've heard that some of I can't remember which Cherokee tribe it was in Tennessee that required that their members be from a certain religious sect, some Protestant fringe group of some sort, which that is completely ridiculous because, Indianness doesn't come from a religious perspective or belief. Indianness is about family. It's about lineage. And although I know a lot of Indian people out there will say, oh, well, you have to be part of a close-knit community. Well, the example I always give to kind of give perspective to that idea is that I'm Saponi, and I have Saponi and Cherokee ancestry, and my family, the Collins family, is very large. There are pocket communities. There are pocket communities of our people dotted throughout the United States. I think that there's a pocket community in just about every state in America, and when you start defining a community as local, being within, like, say, a 25-mile radius of a tribal headquarters, it becomes a major issue with some families and tribes because of the history of how our peoples were assimilated. So, a lot of our communities were scattered out because of economic reasons or racial biases that were taking place where they, where a lot of them might have ended up. For instance, when the Saponi started leaving Virginia and North Carolina, they did so because of the racial issues, the taxation, and economic opportunity. And so you had this migration pattern where they created these communities as they went along. And so you have a community in Virginia. Well, you actually have 2 or 3 communities in Virginia. You have 3 or 4 communities in North Carolina and Kentucky and Tennessee, and so on and so on. So when we try to define an Indian community as being localized to a specific geographic location, that becomes extremely biased based on a lack of understanding the history of those people. So I totally understand your point about the MOWA Choctaw having a central location. They've had this long history in a specific geographic area. But if you look at the MOWA Choctaw today, how many of the community members still reside there, and how many of them have dispersed out into the country because of education or economic opportunity? You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I mean, the community doesn't stay contracted or constricted in one geographic area, and none of the federally recognized tribes are that way either. When people think of federally recognized Indians, they think of reservations. They think of the Navajo Reservation or the Pine Ridge Reservation or the Seminole Reservation in Florida. Well, those communities have a history, certainly, but not all of their community members are still all located on those reses. So,
right.
The rules and the definitions are being applied in a way that doesn't reflect the realities of a modern era, of a living, breathing community that evolves over time and may not be all fit, every single one of them being physically located in one specific area, but might be spread out and dispersed within the United States, just like any other ethnic group.
Yeah.
I wanted to also bring up the subject and allow you to explain about the way that you talk about blood quantum, and because I wanted people to understand that you don't have a blood quantum bias. And me and you've talked about this before, but I've had some people question me, about your tactic on using blood quantum to go after these wannabe hunters. And can you explain why you do that?
Sure. Yeah, I have no issue with blood quantum whatsoever. I think like anybody, communities are defined by communities themselves. But the thing is the tactics that these people who attack others' identities use is to say, well, they're not Indian. That they're of minimal Indian descent, if anything at all. And so, you just look right at those people that are saying that, and that's who they are. They're always these very low blood quantum, non-culturally raised individuals. And so for me, it's an eye for an eye. If you want to slap someone in the face, well, you get slapped back the same way. The things that people most fear themselves, what they use against you. And so, that's basically what it is. I think if you come from a descendancy-based tribe that doesn't have a blood quantum, then you certainly cannot expend even a second of your day attacking the identities of others, because it's completely contrary and ironic. And so that's where I, talk about that issue. I could care less how much Indian blood someone is. I only care about it once they start attacking someone else's identity.
So it's about the hypocrisy of the people who are attacking.
Absolutely. I mean, that's all it ever is. I'm a mixed breed myself, so why would I be caring about those kind of situations? I don't try to Uber Indian anybody. I'm upfront about who I am.
Right.
You take it, you leave it. Either way, it's fine with me. It's not going to impact me. I mean, probably like you, I have a family. I got 1 million commitments. I couldn't get to all the people in this world that I want to be a friend to and support if I tried in one lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if someone, I don't like the way you, okay. It doesn't impact my marriage. It doesn't impact my fatherhood. It doesn't impact me being an uncle. It doesn't impact anything.
Right.
I mean, it's whatever. And so you just, I think when we're younger, we get hung up on those things. We want people to not hate us. But I think as you get older, you just you realize that's just the reality of life. There's going to be those types of individuals. But for someone to ever say that I'm against low blood quantum anybody or whatever the case may be, I mean, that's it's ridiculous.
Right.
Because that's definitely not the case. But I will use it against those who attack others.
Totally.
Everything that I do comes in from a defensive side. I never offensively go after anybody.
Right. weapons against us can be used against them.
Sure.
Because as you said, the majority of them seem to have these problems and these issues. A lot of the accusations that they throw out there are true of themselves.
Sure. I mean, for me, we're all allowed to approach it in a different way. Okay? And so I think when you grow up in the context where I grew up, I view myself as racially white because I grew up in a completely minority community. And so there was no question that I was different from those people that were around me. No question about it. And so I tell people all the time the difference between Indian citizenship and Indian race. There is a difference that's inherent in there. I know that I'm of more non-Indian racial ancestry than I am of Indian racial ancestry. I mean, it's not this huge divide, but it's, if you're someone that does math, then you can equate that. And so for me to go out and just say, oh, yeah, I'm racially Indian, I think that's a little insincere. For me to go out and say I'm a member of a tribe, a caring member of a tribe who contributes to my tribal community, that's very sincere. And so that's where the difference is with me, on those sorts of things. So if you're 1/256 black, you would never go out and say, I'm black. Because it's completely unacceptable and it's insincere. But somehow, these people from Cherokee Nation, Oklahoma, if they're 1/256 Indian, they want to say I'm racially Indian. Well, you're not racially Indian. You're a citizen of your tribe. That doesn't make you racially Indian. Race and, your connections via cultural or political identities are different things. Race is a physical identifier. I mean, it's something that is very obvious and open to everyone that comes across your path. It doesn't need to be explained.
One of the things that I had a conversation about a little while back, I think I was having it with Oliver Collins, is that, I've had it with other people too, but being a Native American Indian, it is less about color of skin, or at least from my perspective, less about color of skin and more about your family, where you came from, your cultural background, and also, more importantly, to the issues that we've been talking about regarding recognition in government, is that being Native American Indian is completely different than any other ethnicity or race in this country because of one simple fact, and it's the government-to-government relationship between the Indian tribes and the federal government, and also the treaties that were signed, whether pre-American Revolution or thereafter, because those treaties are legal contracts, it's binding law. And so anyone who is a descendant of Indians has a right to invoke those treaties, because most treaties will use words like posterity or descendants or so on and so forth, which that includes anyone and everyone who has even one little drop of Indian blood in them.
Well, I mean, I certainly don't disagree with you. I just think there's a difference between being a descendant of Indians and being racially an Indian. I mean, that's where I sit on that. In America, discrimination occurs based on race first, not based on what you culturally claim or those sorts of things. The majority of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma would never be discriminated via their phenotype. They would never be discriminated against. So while they can claim an Indian legal identity, and even now today maybe a social identity on some level, that doesn't make them racially that way. A black person receives extreme prejudicial discrimination because they look black. Most Indians who receive discrimination are people who look quote-unquote Indian. My wife is an Indian racially because she looks like an Indian. And so there's been a glass ceiling put against her in her professional life and so forth, which she's been able to edge through and break. But the discrimination she receives on a daily basis via going to the local bank for a home loan, these type of things, is different than what I receive, as I do not have the same phenotype that she has. And so I live in that reality because I've been witness to it. I've been witness to it directly. I look at my own phenotype. So while I think saying, okay, I'm Indian, that's simplistic. Saying I'm racially Indian, that's a whole different ballgame. Especially when you live in these towns, these rural areas here in Oklahoma and so forth. I mean, you will receive direct discrimination based on your phenotype, not based on what you culturally claim. Because there's many Indians here in Oklahoma and other places who have no cultural connection to the community, who don't partake in tribal ceremonies, who do not go to Indian churches, who do not speak the language, who do not do any of these things. But yet they're full-bloods or they're half-breeds that are phenotypically Indian. And so they get discrimination not based on their cultural aptitude, based solely on their racial phenotype. And I think that's hard, especially when you're from when people are from non-federal tribes, where many of their tribal members don't have a racial phenotype as Indian.
Right.
Because it's hard for them to say, okay, because they're, for 20 years they've been, I'm Indian. And then it's hard to have that conversation. There's a difference between race of Indian and being an Indian person in terms of your cultural aptitude and your involvement in community. I look at my own kids, they're going to have very different, the world's going to impact them in different ways. I have a daughter who looks like any full-blood. I have a son who's probably somewhere in the middle, got brown hair, but light eyes, lighter skin. Then I got a boy who's blonde-headed and green-eyed, all from the same, we're all from the same family here. And then I have a young one who knows what he's going to look like right now. He's got pitch black hair and he's got dark brown eyes, but he could change into something else too.
And oftentimes in mixed families, the skin color often changes with age. So you can be dark younger and end up lighter as you get older, or the reverse.
Right. And I had bleached blonde hair when I was born.
Yeah.
Picture on the website.
Yeah, me too.
And as I got older, my hair got brown and whatever.
I think they call that towhead children.
Towhead, right. Right. And then you see my dad. Of course, my dad had black hair and dark brown hair. My dad was darker skinned than me, of course, and all those kind of things. So it's just kind of and that's, for me, it really comes down to a lot of those kind of issues. Because if you're black and you're 1/64th black, and you say I'm black, well, the black person doesn't think you're black. So there's that difficulty in being that claimant. Because what the black person is saying is, it's not that I don't feel that you look black, it's that I know because of how you look, you do not receive the discrimination I do.
Right, they're lighter.
Right, so how can you make a claim to my oppression?
Well, that's kind of an opposite bias that's prevalent in the African American community, where they have lighter skinned African Americans and darker skinned African Americans, and what's ironic is that regardless of color, dark or light, when an African American goes over to Africa, a lot of the Africans there don't view them as African. Right,
exactly. That's right. We create so many classes within our own communities. It's just it's incredible. We have to find someone to oppress. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's like our communities, we all have to find someone to oppress. Like in the MOWA Choctaw community, we joke around too. You got brown phenotypical MOWAs, and you got a few that look like me. And they give us a hard time.
Yeah.
And it's all in kidding. It's your own family members and stuff. But there's some truth to their kidding.
One of the things I think that I have the hardest time, and I think like what you just said, it's true with other mixed race native people in the country, is I do have a problem with the issue of race and how to identify racially, because my family hails from what is called the Melungeon community. Right. And so there is a mixture, depending on which family or group of families that you came from. You could have, Asian, African, European, and Native American all rolled into one family. Right. I mean, that's a distinct possibility. Right. And at the same time, what you're saying is true. Most people, the general public, when they their impressions about you racially is what they see. So if you look phenotypically European, they think you're white. If you look phenotypically African, they think you're African American.
Exactly.
If you look phenotypically Native American, well then they think you're Native American, or they might even think you're Mexican.
Mexican, right?
And I had a conversation with a couple of friends back in the early 90s, and we talked about this issue. And one of the things that they were saying was an African American woman and a Mexican American woman, and we were talking about discrimination based on skin color and phenotype. So if, let's say an African American went into an office, a city office back in the 1950s, they wouldn't even let them in the door. But if someone looked phenotypically white but were racially mixed, they might get in the door, but as soon as they got to the office, then they'd kick them out.
Sure.
So their point was that being phenotypically, African or not being white was somehow worse than being able to get through the door and get to the office, but still having that discrimination. My point was that discrimination is discrimination. That pain is shared equally amongst anyone who's discriminated against. And so while I see that point about phenotype, who can't? It's obvious. We all live with that.
Sure.
The discrimination that occurs, whether it's in your face or under the table, after you get through the door, is still just as painful.
And that's what the big communities deal with. Okay, for instance, like surnames in our community. Say you're someone that looks like me in my community. You can get through the door, right? But then eventually they see your surname, and you're one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear what you're saying. I totally hear. You can almost suffer racial discrimination based on your parents' phenotype.
Yeah.
That's true. No,
or even just your family's reputation.
Absolutely. I agree.
That's what Dr. Flecker did in Virginia. He would make sure everyone's birth certificates and marriage certificates were stamped and had notations on the back.
Right.
So you might get through the door, but as soon as they saw your name and found out who you were, well, buddy, you were out.
Right. Yeah. If you're a Branham, if you're a Collins, if you're whatever, eventually someone's going to know.
Right.
No, I agree with that. I think that's pretty isolated to our type of small communities, though.
Yeah,
there's not a lot of other communities in the world that deal with that.
Right.
And so, when you think on the bigger picture, we're just this, blip on the radar screen. But typically, only these quote-unquote tri-racial, I hate these terms.
I know.
These communities are the ones that are dealing with that. Lumbees are a perfect example. Lumbees come in every color of the rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
But they all got the last name Locklear and so forth. And the second that name pops up, oh, you're one of them.
Yeah.
And so it becomes...
Well, you know that the Melungeons are the same as the Lumbee, right?
Yeah, they... yeah.
The court records, in court records and other documents, that link has been shown. But everyone's been called a Melungeon. The Nanticokes have been called Melungeons. All the Virginia tribes. You look in all these same MOWAs. Everyone's at some point been called a Redbone, a Melungeon, a this and that. The Homas in Louisiana. We do come from unique communities. There's no doubt about that. And I think, of course, there's going to be, I think, in this day and age, there's this preference to focus on the Indian aspect of the community. But here's where I can look at that in a different form. When we were just at the Indian Health Service Hospital having our child here, one of our nurses, she's full-blood Choctaw. Okay? And so she comes in, and it turns out that when you really talk to her, she was hoping, she married a white man, moved out of state. She was hoping her kids when they were born, now she's 50 years old, so she's not that old. She was hoping her kids would be light-skinned when they were born. Okay? And she said how much shame she felt in wanting that. And she said, now with my grandchildren, I pray they're dark-skinned. You see? Yeah.
So even within the most these Melungeon or whatever, these mixed East Coast communities, they're trying to just accentuate their Indianness now, blah blah blah, blah, or they're trying to do this and that. That's exactly what these federal tribes and other tribes are doing too. So it can't be one with the other. It can't be bad for one, but it's not bad for you.
Right.
If you're doing the same damn thing, then how dare you accuse someone else of that?
Exactly.
Because everyone's going through. I mean, everyone knows this quote-unquote cultural renaissance is happening across the board, whether federal, non-federal, whatever the case may be. And people attack it in different ways. Some people add italicized names in between their first and last names. Some people do this. I mean, people just do whatever they can. The Chickasaw Nation, for instance, the wealthiest Indian tribe in the country, right? And so they just had a naming ceremony. I mean, Choctaws and Chickasaws, we don't have naming ceremonies. But they just had this one, and the governor of the Chickasaw Nation, Bill Anatuppy, he signed proclamation with the person's Indian name on it. And gave it to these 60 people at this Chickasaw Council in Texas, because they have Chickasaw councils all over the country now where their citizens live, where they can group 20 or more together. Well, to most people looking at that, we just laugh our heads off and go, oh my God, they're giving out Indian names and they're putting it on certificates. I mean, how utterly ridiculous. But the other side is, they don't know no better. That's the way they're choosing to do it.
Right.
And so, that's the way they do it. And to me, I can turn that against them. So the second the Chickasaws come out and say something negative about other tribes' identities, I just pull up that article.
I think one of the reasons why, they say it's so popular to be Indian. I've heard that my whole life, that people say it's popular to be Indian. And I've always questioned that notion about the popularity of it. I think that there are people out there who want to be trendy. I think there are people like that out there, but I think most Indian communities are struggling against this genocide process that's gone on for generations, and it is safer into the modern time to be Native American, to be who your people are.
Sure.
And to have that, whether people want to identify as being a descendant or whether they want to identify as being, Indian. And I think that, it's hard for me to criticize anyone for trying to follow some kind of way of, being, honoring their ancestors in whatever way that they can. But at the same time, I see your point, and I also see NAFPS's point and Task Force Cherokee's point about some of the crazy things that we see out there that people do to try to honor their ancestors. And if people would just take the time to do a little bit of research about their own people and their own communities, then they would know. They'd know exactly what they need to do in order to honor their ancestors and to, feel proud about their heritage.
I think it's hard because people live on sound bites.
Yeah.
We're going to do research. I mean, think about it. The Chickasaw Nation. They have so much wealth, so many cultural programs, so many things they're doing, right? But yet the governor of the nation is still signing proclamations with Indian names on them. And so, there's just a reality to people like expediency. They think, it's like the Christian who was never a Christian who suddenly is born again. It's
right.
That same kind of, it's that just evangelical, I'm going to get all over this, and for me, identity is very situational. And here's the best way I can illustrate it. When I went back to my dad's community, of course I knew my dad was an Indian because everybody told me he was an Indian growing up. You know what I mean? Because he looks like an Indian, and so therefore he was an Indian. And, so I was the son of an Indian, but no one in the community considered me an Indian. You see what I'm saying? My dad was the Indian. My mom, obviously I knew was white because she looked white, but I didn't know white people had a culture. I didn't know there was a heritage. I didn't know you could be a certain kind of white person. I didn't know what a Scottish person was. I had no clue. My mom never once brought that up. She couldn't stand where she grew up. Australia as quick as she could. First person in the community to marry a non-person from the community ever, since the community was founded in the 1840s. So, when I went back to my dad's reservation first at 18, and so it'd be easy to get caught up in that, and I'm this, that, and that. But then when I was 20, 2 years later, and I went to live in Canada, my focus, without a question, was on my Scottish identity. It had much greater prevalence than my Indian ancestry. I was living with my grandmother. I was just very much intrigued. I was reading.
Trying to get to know that part of your heritage.
Oh my gosh, way more than my Indian side. And so there I was, and so 7-8 months into it, we had a family reunion. And so my Uncle Horace was there with my grandmother's brothers, Fred and them, and they sing the Gaelic songs and they do all those sorts of things. So then my uncles are drinking at the family reunion, and they made some racial comments about my dad. And that was the end. Because I've always been for the underdog in my life. And the underdog gets my attention. And so my Scottish ancestry became the oppressor in some ways. Because my own great uncle was making racial comments about my father. And at that point, I was either going to go to university. I had already played 2 years of ball in the States, but I was either going to go to university in Scotland, or I was going to go to St. FX, the east coast of Canada, and major in Gaelic studies, and Scottish studies. That's what I was going to do. I also applied to Trent University with a Native Studies program, but the Native Studies program, I was going to focus mine on indigenous Gaelic issues as opposed to American Indian First Nations issues. And then that occurred. And a month later, I was leaving I ended up going to Trent, a month later, and I ended up majoring in Native Studies. And while I still went to Scottish events and was involved in that, had that not occurred, I'd probably be living on the Isle of Skye right now in northern Scotland. I'm being straight up honest with you, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
My mom is almost a full-blood Scot. Everyone has Ojibwe ancestry in the community, but she's predominantly of that ancestry. My son's middle name that was born, his middle name is McGregor. That's my mom's maternal line, and it's spelled in Gaelic, not the English version. And his first name is Kiowa, but his middle name is McGregor. And on my arm, I have a huge tattoo that runs down my forearm. It says, Amfir Halis Hanin Khalid Ashogul. And it says in Scottish Gaelic, it says, he who loses his language loses his world. And so what I've impressed upon the Indian community that I live amongst and in is, don't tell me who to be.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell me what should have relevance to me. And, living with my grandma had a huge impact on that. It's because life's situational. I didn't live with my dad. My dad chose drug dealing, even though he's a community advocate too, so people are complex. But he chose that over being a father. And my grandpa, was alcoholic and just a rough military guy. So I don't have good memories of him. But if he had been a nice guy, and I had lived with him for 7 or 8 months, that probably would have been my entire course, But he wasn't. And I lived with the nice grandma, for all that time, and ended up staying in Canada. And even though I worked in First Nations communities, I still had that, allegiance to my grandma. So I think we all find our ways in different ways, what's important to us. And those people who are of, whatever Scottish and Indian ancestry who choose just to focus on their Indian ancestry, I'm completely good with that. I don't have any issue with that whatsoever. But for me, that just hasn't been my path. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't know being Indian was cooler than being Scottish. To me, when I look at language revitalization efforts, I work for Seminole Nation now, developing their immersion school for their kids, their language program. When I look at language revitalization efforts, my Choctaw language has 12,000 fluent speakers in the U.S. And Scottish Gaelic in North America has 500, and to be honest with you, maybe 300. Which one deserves my attention more? See, these are all complex issues.
Yeah.
They're complex issues. Because people can say, well, you can go back to Scotland, there's 20,000 fluent speakers there. But it's not the same. as it is in our remnant communities here. And then the Michif language, there's very, very few speakers of that Métis language as well. And especially Ontario Michif, which is totally different than Plains Michif, which is Cree and French. In Ontario, it's a mix of English and Ojibwe. And that language is struggling. And then, possibly just going to be gone. So, you have all these kind of things. And then me and my wife, we run a program called Kiowa Kids, which is a volunteer program where we just do Kiowa language programs focused on children for all the Kiowa families here in the Norman, Oklahoma City, Kiowa metropolitan area here. So we have to focus on there. There's less than 50 fluent speakers in Kiowa. So I have a responsibility as a parent of Kiowa children to ensure the vitality of the Kiowa language, even though I'm not Kiowa. So how we define ourselves based on families, I'm a member of a Kiowa family.
Right.
Though I have no Kiowa blood. I'm always going to be a conch from Key West, even though I have no conch biological ancestry. Because no one told me I didn't have a conch biological ancestry. I didn't know that. I didn't have an understanding of that. I didn't know my parents' family until later on. So, identity's complex that way.
Very much so.
But my primary identity in the end is social justice. And that's where I fall. When it comes down to it in the end, being a conch, being MOWA Choctaw, it's being involved in issues of social justice and trying to right as many wrongs as possible. Sometimes being successful in it, sometimes being a total failure in it. Be giving it a shot. And, I've read you write extensively, and you're certainly a historian in many ways. And so you have a path that you work on social justice issues. Because really, who would know about the Zaponis in Ohio? Or the Zaponis in general, if it wasn't for people like you writing about them and talking about them, being up front, and engaging these issues. Very few people would know that. Because unless you don't have a huge mega casino outside of a huge metropolitan area, nobody knows about you anyway.
Exactly. I made a decision long ago. I would never step foot in a casino of any sort, tribal or non-tribal.
Yeah.
And you're right. There's a lot of tribes out there that people haven't heard of. And I had a phone conversation once with a tribal representative from the Wichita, and he made a powerful statement. He said, "People have forgotten us."
Yeah.
And to me, for myself and the Saponi, the highest form of honoring my ancestors is to educate people about who the Saponi are and how they were assimilated and how they got to the state that they're in today. Because you go and you look in encyclopedias under certain tribes like the Saponi or the Tutelo or others, it'll give them a label of being extinct. Well, they're not extinct. They're still here.
Yeah.
And maybe a government to government relationship doesn't exist in the same form today as it might have in colonial America.
Right.
But the people still exist, and there are bits and pieces of the culture that did survive, and there are people amongst our tribe that are trying their best to revive that culture and create a sense of continuation with our people. Because the younger generations, people younger than myself, I'm 39, people younger than me, just really don't seem to have the interest in carrying that torch.
Yeah.
And so those of us who do have an interest have to be sure to make an impact. We have to get the message out there, and it does involve social justice issues, because whether you're MOWA Choctaw, whether you're Cherokee, whether you're Tlingit, Eskimo, Native Hawaiian, Seminole, Iroquois, whatever tribe that you're from, there is an action of genocide that is still currently ongoing. We may not be getting shot in the head, we may not be getting rounded up and put into camps or reservations, but certainly through paper genocide, through denials and persecution, whether from non-Indians or federally recognized Indians, we are still undergoing that genocide process today.
Yeah.
And we have to fight that.
Yeah.
Any way we can.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think you and we can bridge the gap on that whole, issue of racial Indian and being
certainly.
I don't think that's any major minefield to walk over.
Yeah, I don't think that's too big of a hurdle. I mean, when I'm walking down the street, if I had to say what people were thinking of me when they see me, they're probably thinking, oh, here comes a white man walking.
Yeah.
But at the same time, someone from the BIA called my cousin Donna Tower in Ohio and asked her that question. What do people think of you when you're walking down the street?
Yeah.
And I told Donna, I said, well, first of all, how would I know? Unless I'm some kind of a psychic or something, how would I know what people walking down the street looking at me are thinking? Because everybody has their own viewpoint about race. I mean, someone could look at me and say, oh, there's a white guy. Someone else could look at me and say, oh, he kind of looks, like maybe he might have some Asian or some native blood or something. I don't look, I look white from a distance, but if you look at my face, you'll see my eyes are not big and round, like a typical European. So sometimes people look at me, and I have gotten asked, what ethnicity are you,
Sure.
But the whole thing about black or white, that's what our country's all about. There's no other race except blacks and whites.
Sure. Well, and look at this too. Here's the flip. If me and my wife went to Europe, we're here in rural Oklahoma, she's discriminated against, whereas I wouldn't be, based on sight. Okay?
Right.
So everything's situational. But if me and her went to England, or me and her went to Switzerland, they would be talking about her like she was the greatest thing walking on earth.
Oh yeah, they love Native Americans over there.
And I would be a nobody standing next to her. So how you're perceived is totally situational to where you live, where you're at that moment, and all those kind of things. She would have a decided advantage over me.
Yeah.
I mean, immediately she would have a decided advantage. There's no question about that. So yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, we live here. You understand? I mean, I'm talking about coming from rural southwestern Alabama and rural Oklahoma. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the racial divide is so in your face.
Sure. Throw me in New York City at some highfalutin art thing, and see who gets more love, my wife or me. She's going to get so much love, she's not going to know what to do with it.
Right.
And I will certainly be on the margin immediately, like, this is an Indian, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah, it just depends on, place to place. It's just place to place. So, but, like, my wife, she was at the hardware store. She come home, and she was really upset. And she was with the kids, and I was at work. And she said, Cedric, the white man that owns the store, and we know him. He, not know him personally, we know of him. He said, how many different dads have those kids got?
Oh my God.
I mean, straight up. He would never have asked anyone but an Indian woman in Oklahoma that kind of obscene, ridiculous question. I mean, I almost went down there and killed the guy. But that's how it is.
Yeah.
Because it couldn't possibly, those kids that look a little bit, they couldn't possibly be from the same father because she's an Indian. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really bad. So
that sort of attitude was something that was quite prevalent in the so-called Melungeon communities back east in Tennessee and Kentucky. in the Clinch Valley there in Virginia, because of the intermixture. You know, a set of parents could have children that looked completely different from either one, and so you'd have these mixed, and I think that's true of any mixed blood Indian community. You know, you're not going to always have carbon copies of the parents come out, and so there are these questions that invariably arise from the minds of degenerate people who are racist.
Sure.
And that's horrible. I mean, you know, Dr. Sproul, a good friend of mine, lives in right there near the border with Oklahoma and Texas. He goes into a local gas station, and the white guy calls him a prairie nigger.
Yeah.
And, you know, what do you do when you encounter something like that? As a man, I want to, you know, if that happens to me, I want to punch the guy in the teeth, you know,
yeah,
for making such a nasty statement like that. But gosh, you know, it's you know, when you hear these instances of racism, in your face racism occur, it just sets you on end, because we're in 2011.
Yeah.
We're not back in 1950. We're not in, you know, Mississippi is not supposed to be burning today. You know.
Oh, right.
You know, it. You know, racism. That type of blatant racism, it should be dwindling down to absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
But it just seems like it kind of sticks around.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
It is.
Well, I don't want to keep you any longer. I know that you're busy with the newborn and everything, and it was really great talking to you. I thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview.
Oh, I appreciate you calling me and thinking about me on that.
And I hope we'll be able to do it again in the future.
All right.
Okay.
I appreciate it, Scott. I'll talk to you soon, man.
You have a good day.
Hey, Scott, actually, let me, hold on a sec. I want to make sure I got... Oh, no, I think I do. I have it here. I'm looking at it. Never mind. I got your contact information right on my list, so I was just making sure.
Okay, great.
All right, man.
You have a good day. Bye-bye.